Facepalm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is where you can find out more information about the show, listen to past episodes, and connect with us on social media. The gig economy is this weird thing that has evolved in the last couple of decades. I guess, in a way, it springs out of the Silicon Valley and the tech revolution that has occurred over that same period of time, but it really has become something of a different order because although it has been enabled by the technology, when it comes right down to it in so many ways, it's just good old-fashioned exploitative capitalism is what it comes down to. And there is nominally a social safety net in this country, and anybody who listens to this program is aware that it doesn't work particularly well for most people. Even if you have a regular job, a W-2 job, if you're doing pretty well, it doesn't function very well for most people. And for people in the gig economy, it functions almost not at all. And that is the topic of a book called Side Hustle Safety Net, How Vulnerable Workers Survive Precarious Times. The author of that book, Alexandrea Ravenelle, is assistant professor of sociology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she is here to speak with us. Alexandrea, welcome to Facepalm America. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
So, first of all, when we talk about a side hustle, it's such a weird term for me because people have often several side hustles. There's often no main hustle. That's the only thing that they depend upon, quote unquote, and they jump from hustle to hustle. There's a sort of implicit assumption in the term that there's something else, that this is just a side thing and it's going to be okay, sort of in the way that, like, well, flipping hamburgers, that's just for teenagers. And that neither of those are good assumptions, are they?
No, they are not good assumptions. No, they are not good assumptions. That multiple side hustle, I call that polyemployment, the idea of working multiple jobs. And you're right, it is a growing phenomenon. Originally, maybe somebody had like one little bit of a side job on occasion, right? Maybe it was holiday season, you need some extra money, you want that store discount, and you would take on a part-time job at your favorite retailer. But now we're seeing that grow. Even official statistics from the government say it's about 8%. And those numbers are only for people who have a full-time W-2 job and then have a part-time W-2 job on the side. When we start factoring in people who have multiple part-time jobs, whether W-2 or 1099, it ends up probably being a much bigger number.
And that's something I was going to ask you about. One, how big is the gig economy, and how does the Labor Department deal with statistics around this? Because, it's something that I've often wondered before. What technically constitutes a job? And it sort of seems like the definition is in flux. Does it count, a gig worker as being employed in a job?
Not really. So,
Wow.
When I interview workers, they all talk about this idea of like a real job. And a real job is a W-2 job that's full-time, that offers benefits, or at least has stable hours, right? You're going to work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday from 9 until 9. But when it comes to counting these numbers, almost anything goes. We have some surveys, like out of the Pew Foundation, saying that it's about 16% of workers right now are doing gig work. We have other surveys from the Federal Reserve that found before COVID that it was about 20-something% of the population. And it very much differs by age. So younger people are more likely to be doing gig work. Very famously, Uber, which has access to all these statistics, right? They have a lot of information about their drivers. They've described a worker as anyone who has given a ride, even once in the last 6 months, as an active Uber driver. So it's a very broad count, if you will.
Yeah. Uber has access to this information, but it's not really centralized in any way by the labor department. So to begin with, we don't have great information about what's going on here. And two, the information that we have leads us to some very startling conclusions about like what's happening to people in this sector.
Right, exactly. Yes, we don't have good information. The information we do have about workers' experiences is usually very concerning. Workers are very much exploited in terms of not knowing how much they're going to get paid. Yeah. They face economic risks. They face physical risks, risk of sexual harassment or sexually uncomfortable experiences. And in some cases, even the risk of being involved accidentally in criminal behavior.
Right. And explain that a little bit, because it really is the Wild West in terms of things that you can get out of Upwork and TaskRabbit and other platforms like that.
Yes. So that was actually the start of my research into the gig economy. I was talking to this guy. He was doing TaskRabbit. I was like, "Oh, this is great. I'm an entrepreneur. You're an entrepreneur. It's great." And he tells me about getting hired for this task to pick up a prescription at the local pharmacy. Thinks it's fine. He shows up. There's a lot of problems back and forth. Eventually, they give him the drugs, and it's a huge bottle of amphetamines. And the person gets in touch and says, "Hey, I want you to mail this to China, and don't do a customs declaration." Well, that's illegal on numerous cases, right? Yeah. Like individuals can't ship pharmaceuticals. Only drugstores can do that. You can't lie on customs paperwork. You can't lie on customs paperwork internationally. The whole, and he ends up just carrying the drugs around for a week and then doing a handoff in a local park, which is also problematic. And he's just hoping, what if I get stopped by the police?
Yeah.
Right? Like there are all these ways in which these workers are, you put it yourself earlier, exploited. And they are very much taken advantage of. They're the fall guys and girls.
I'm a fan of old time movies, and it sounds like a movie with Jimmy Cagney, from the 1930s, where he's running around, a returned war veteran with a newsboy cap, and he's like being unknowingly exploited by a bootlegger in the 1920s or something like that. In a way, like things really haven't progressed in 100 years in terms of how the economy is in place. I mean, there were some protections in the 1930s, but they've been eroded, and they just don't apply to people who do this kind of thing.
Yeah, so we've really had this movement forward to the past, because if you're a W-2 worker, you have workplace protections, right? Yeah. You have protections in terms of contributions to Social Security and Medicaid. You have health insurance provided by your employer if you work more than 30 hours and they're over a certain size. You have FMLA if you're over a certain size. You know what your paycheck is going to be, and there are protections if you don't get your paycheck on time. But these gig workers are really just kind of moving back, almost like something out of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Yeah. Just clamoring at the gate, waiting for a ping so they can be exploited.
Yeah, it's like the jungle with apps.
Yes, the jungle with apps.
It's
and the lambs being brought to the slaughter are the workers.
Yeah, basically so. I mean, there's so many things. What sorts of information do we have about what's happening to these people? What the results are in terms of health and even productivity for workers that don't get things like health insurance and sick days and things that you really need in order to get by in a modern society.
I mean, these workers become incredibly vulnerable. We know, for instance, during COVID, that workers that had to keep working, that were in these face-to-face jobs, were much more likely to die. They were much more likely to experience COVID, to bring COVID home to their families. And the other thing is, workers who turn to this, they get stuck. The first round of interviews I did for my first book, Hustle and Gig, which came out in 2019, I followed up with those workers later. These were people I had interviewed for the first time in 2017. And they all told me, "Oh, this is short term. This is short-term work." Yeah. When I followed up with them years later, they were still doing it. Some of them have gotten in touch with me. We're in the year 2023. They're still doing it. So it's really hard after you've been delivering food for 5 years or 7 years to get back into a stable office job with benefits.
It's just as a sort of a side thing, it occurs to me because I've never had a job specifically like that, and who would you give as a reference? I mean, like how do employers in W-2 positions react to people from the gig economy who then apply to work? I mean, it seems like there are a lot of holes in your traditional application that you would have. How does that even function?
That's a good question. So sometimes people will group everything together and they'll be like, oh, I'm just going to pretend I was my own boss and had my own company. And they'll call themselves like Shelby Delivers. And then they'll, we've all done those resumes where like, let me spin this a little, right?
But they're just piecing something together, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, they all spin it together. In terms of references, I mean, I'll be honest, as a researcher, I've been asked to serve as a reference for some of these workers. It's like, well, I set up an interview with her. I had an interview. I told her my story. She'll vouch for me about what's going on. But yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And oftentimes employers are like, oh, well, you didn't have a real schedule. You didn't have 9 to 5. You're used to this level of, quote, freedom or flexibility. And I'm not going to give you that as a low wage employer. And so they don't want to hire them because they think, they're like wild horses or something.
Yeah, it's really stunning. You talked about COVID a moment ago and the impact that it had on gig economy workers. How did the relief efforts that the government put forth impact gig economy workers?
So I think, there's this phrase like the scariest sentence in the English language is, I'm from the government, I'm here to help.
Right, Ronald Reagan.
Let me tell you, and as I say this, I'm getting goosebumps, that is completely turned on its head during COVID. Mm-hmm. During COVID, we have unemployed gig workers who are able to get unemployment assistance. This is stable money. This is money that's coming in where they don't have to go and spend money on their car to get gas. They're not getting parking tickets. This is life changing for these workers. They start businesses, they go back to school, they change careers. There's one guy, college educated, he's been driving for Uber for 4 years, and he's able to use his COVID unemployment money, which takes months to shows up in a great big pot of money one day. He bursts into tears when it shows up. Shows up on the anniversary of when his stepdad dies, really intense. And he uses that money to change careers and become a community rehabilitation specialist. He's helping disabled individuals participate in the community fully. I mean, it's amazing. And that's what my book is all about.
It's incredible because that wasn't like per person a whole lot of money. It just shows you that it doesn't take a lot in order to take care of a vast swath of what the American economy has become.
Exactly. Yeah, it ends up being a little over $20,000 of extra money in New York. and other states, it ends up being a little bit different because of how their unemployment is set up. But $20,000, that's roughly the price of 2 weeks at Rikers or a year at CUNY. And as I say, those will change your life. CUNY hopefully will change your life better than Rikers. But these are full on massive changes. One guy goes from being a dog walker to starting his own business. He's making $20,000 a month in profit and has a staff of 5.
Wow. So that money's gone now. And are there any other efforts on the horizon, either federally or state by state, in order to, I hate to put it in terms of filling gaps, because really it should be the creation of a foundation that assists gig workers and other people throughout the economy. But are there any attempts to sew up the massive holes in the social safety net that we have in this country that gig workers are falling through?
Yeah, so we actually are seeing some efforts to try universal basic income in various communities. And, in many ways, that unemployment money, although it wasn't universal, right? You had to be unemployed to get it, and you had to qualify for unemployment. You had to be officially unemployed. But in many ways, it sort of functions in the same way. It's money that comes in that you can do what